Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Entered in morning. Welcome, John. If we think that our fundamental rights have been violated, we don't have to just limit ourselves to finding a soapbox and climbing the soapbox and declaring this violation to one and all. We can bring this charge before a national tribunal and seek an effective remedy. Now, one connection with last week is we have to figure out what counts as a national tribunal and whether or not, we hear this phrase often, whether or not we have standing before that tribunal. A point in question would be if I find myself in Albania and I think my rights are being violated, is there really going to be a tribunal in which I can bring this charge? That's my reading to start.
I think the way that I would summarize this is that everyone's entitled to their day in court. And that's whether the state is prosecuting you, whether someone else is suing you, or whether you need to sue for remedy under the law. You're entitled to competent courts. And I love that they included the word competent there. You know, no kangaroo court, no obviously discriminatory courts, but competent national tribunals. Everyone gets their day in front of a competent judge.
To connect with the news today, and oftentimes the news in past months, suppose you're not in Albania. Suppose you are in Venezuela. There are a number of people there that think their fundamental rights are being violated, and whether there are any competent national tribunals is very much an open question now.
Indeed. John, do you have any thoughts on this?
Not at the moment. I'm still going through the technical stuff here, so I'm still trying to figure out Skype and how to work it. So,
voice sounds great.
I'm sorry.
But when we're talking about gentle auditors, our listeners, when we're talking about technical stuff today, we are, and this is not a high-level break except for somebody like me, we are all on a computer using Skype. And in the past, what we've been doing is connecting by way of telephone. But now we're all plugged into Skype. And the idea is, according to our friend Jack Quirk, that the audio sound will be improved. We'll see how it goes.
So, again, just touching back to Article 8, there are situations that, as Jim brought up, internationally, where the question is, do you have the standing before the court to prosecute, to sue, to pursue remedy of infractions against your rights that have been granted by Constitution or law? Are there situations that either of you are aware of inside the United States where access to the courts is currently an ongoing issue?
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is Guantanamo. Now, that's not within the United States in an ordinary sense, but it's a United States base, and there are individuals there who have not been brought before any national tribunal in any normal sense, and they've been there for years.
Now, to be clear, you're not referring to the ones who have been before military tribunals, because that's still a court under law. You're referring to the ones that haven't even been charged in military trials, correct?
Yes. Now, I'm also thinking that there are preliminary tribunals, and there's some sort of tribunal that actually would have the power to decide something. And I find the whole thing in Guantanamo to be just hopelessly murky.
I think we're well under 20 inmates there now, aren't we?
I think it's gone down, but even then, when they've been sent somewhere, the question is, have there been competent national tribunals where they're sent? If you have somebody who's seeking to have his or her fundamental rights adjudicated, and you deal with it in your competent national tribunal by sending them somewhere where you have every reason to think that there aren't competent national tribunals that will hear their cases, that's not much of a step forward.
Mm-mm. I was trying to contort this in my mind to see if I could find a way to bring back up the public defenders and kind of, punish Jack for not being here with us this morning, but I don't think that's what this is addressing necessarily.
Well, we can just say that ordinarily, on an everyday basis here in the United States, it looks like Article 8 is being satisfied. Now, there are cases that are marginal, but it doesn't seem to be that we have, within the United States, a problem honoring Article 8.
And I really do think we need to be grateful for that. I think as a culture, we are much more prone to pay attention to what's outrageous, to negatives, to places where we fall short. I think the fact that we do have rule of law and we do have a functioning court system should bring us joy.
Yes. Now, I remember a fellow named Matthew Bart go, "Hey, that's you," posting on a American Solidarity Party site that there have been real improvements in international law and in international justice, and in narrowing the far too wide gap between the haves and the have-nots. And we should rejoice. We certainly should.
The world is getting better.
Let me, while we're still on Article 8, let me just introduce a case that many of us might not be aware of. In Canada, as I understand it, our neighbor to the north, groups of native peoples have now been granted a kind of semi-autonomous national status. And it's interesting that within these nations, there are practices which would, in Canada, be clearly unconstitutional. For example, in a native Canadian, shall we say, an indigenous people nation in Canada, should you marry someone outside your nation, you are expelled from the nation. Now, here we have a case, I think, of one step forward and at least one step back in order to recognize the dignity of people. A kind of but only semi-autonomous standing is given. Now we have a new nation within a nation, and the new nation has a policy, to wit, anyone who marries outside the nation is expelled from the nation. I think here in the United States and in Canada in general, this would be seen as a violation of a human right, the right to marry someone that you choose to marry and chooses to marry you. And I think when we do make progress, and we do make progress, it's oftentimes a mixed sort of progress.
Right.
But maybe we should go on to 9.
I think that does segue us nicely into 9, which says, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary, that's the key word there, arrest, detention, or exile. I think it is important that that word arbitrary was put in there, as certainly arrests, detentions, and even though, to my knowledge, we don't practice it in the United States ever historically, exiles may be justified after they have been a case has been tried in a court of law.
Now, depending on how closely we read this, we can connect it with the whole business of racial profiling. If somebody says, stop, I'm going to search you, well, I've been detained long enough for the search. And if the detention, understood in that sense of detention, is based on racial profiling, and there isn't a real case to be made to support racial profiling, then that would be a case of arbitrary detention.
Absolutely
And
correct.
A great many people argue that rarely has any kind of a case been made for the effectiveness of racial profiling. And just within the last couple of days, the New York Times, which has its vices but has its virtues as well, has called attention to the real disproportion in terms of drug arrests in New York that can be connected with racial profiling. Now, I'm speaking in a generic way. In every single case, if we have a decent judiciary, that case is going to be closely examined. But there certainly is nationwide a concern about arbitrary detention based on racial profiling.
In one sense, I could see where Article 9 could be applied where it was to North Korea, where they arrested and detained Otto Warmbier, over an arbitrary charge. They charged him with stealing a propaganda poster, and they even had video evidence of it, but that particular video evidence isn't really conclusive. It's so blurry, it could be anybody. So that right there is a clear example of a violation of this, where he was arrested over something minuscule as taking a poster, and they make a whole big deal out of it, and in the end they sent him back home in a vegetative state where he eventually died.
Yes, that was a horrific case. And of course,
absolutely, and we should be horrified by it.
We've noticed before that when we look at a particular article, there'll be a term in the article that brings us back to another article. So if we read, no one shall be subject to arbitrary arrest, well, that leads us to consider what's the law in virtue of which someone has been arrested. And if the law itself is arbitrary, well, everything falls apart. So if we have a law that says the distribution of Bibles, consider North Korea and other countries as well, the distribution of Bibles is illegal, well, then that law itself is really arbitrary. And so the question of an arbitrary arrest with regard to an arbitrary law, the plot thickens and the plot sickens.
So how would you guys say we do with this one in the United States? We do have the instances of racial profiling. We do have instances which may not fall under Article 9. They might be back up under Article 5 for the cruel treatment or punishment. But I'm thinking someone steals a pack of cigarettes and ends up being shot by the cops. It's a capital offense to commit petty theft. How do we score in your minds on the arbitrariness of our arrests and detentions?
Well, gosh, here I am, tempted to go philosophical and theological, and once again I'm yielding to the temptation. There's a point made by Thomas Aquinas, and Catholics refer to Aquinas as the common doctor, among other things. Augustine is referred to as the doctor of grace, because Augustine has so much to say about the nature of grace, upon which we also manifestly depend. But the common doctor, in discussing moral questions, says that sometimes the violation is so minor that, well, what we'd say today, common sense ignores the violation. Now, I think stealing one package of cigarettes, I think that's borderline. But if you go in many areas in Los Angeles, there are people selling cigarettes one at a time for $1. Here, have a cigarette. I'll sell you a cigarette for $1. Now, of course, that somebody would sell a cigarette for $1 is questionable. And now, suppose we have somebody who steals not a package of cigarettes, but a cigarette, and is imprisoned for that. I think at some point we want to say, well, how about a warning? Don't you ever dare steal that one cigarette again. And we talk oftentimes about a rule of law being more important than a rule of this person or that person. But when it comes to the rule of law, the law itself has to be interpreted. And it's a logical impossibility that we have a set of laws that are all mutually self-interpreting. At some point, you have to break out of the web of laws and have a person look to the application of the laws. And, well, I think that connects with where Matthew got us launched, at least, the case of being arrested for a minor violation.
Any thoughts, Paul?
Did I obfuscate hopelessly?
You didn't do too bad for you.
That's condemning with faint praise.
Any thoughts from our postgraduate or our educated man in the house?
Yes.
Man, just with the example of being arrested for a pack of cigarettes, I mean, it requires someone to press the charge first off, and another person commits, first the person commits the crime, another person presses the charges, and then it's up to the third person, which is law enforcement, to follow up on it, and the fourth person is ultimately a judge. So within those, you can almost say chains of command in one sense. If one person presses a charge, then by law, the police are bound to respond to it. However, there is a certain web of discretion that law enforcement and also judges are entitled to. So if it comes down to, if a person steals a cigarette and no one's pressing the charges, then chances are the police aren't going to arrest that person for it unless there's something more extreme about it.
So you're saying that someone exercising their Article 8 right for a remedy by a competent tribunal, someone calling the police, someone pressing the charge, necessitates that not being an arbitrary arrest or detention then?
Well, I have to make sure that the person pressing the charge isn't arbitrary either. And it's not always within the policeman's discretion to enforce it or not. Ultimately, the decision rests with a judge. The person gets their day in court, they make their case, and the judge decides accordingly. And and you'll find, if you ask any police officer, they can give you almost a list of how many cases they brought to court where they've testified, taken time off to testify, and the judge rules against them. Especially when it comes to high-profile cases where it's an ongoing, if it's a long investigation, and detectives have put a lot of time into presenting the case in a convincing manner, the judge or jury can easily dismiss it, and all that work is gone for naught. So you have to make sure that the charge isn't arbitrary, the person pressing it isn't arbitrary, and also the people who are judging the case.
So now I'm going to put both of you on the spot and do something dangerous, which is bring us up to contemporary events, or at least contemporary by my standards. I was a historian in college, so anything in the last 100 years I could call contemporary. But I saw something online from one of my African-American friends that said they want to play a new game with white people. The way you play is when you see a black person who's not doing anything wrong, you don't call the cops. And the next part of the game is you keep not calling the cops for the rest of your life. When we've had in the news recently a man arrested for trespassing in a Starbucks, which was a public place, while he was waiting to meet someone, and I saw another story of someone calling the police to say there was a black man snooping around the neighborhood when it was a cop who was on the job in uniform just because he was black. How as a society can we deal with these, I believe John said, arbitrary pressing charges, arbitrary calling the police? It's not quite the same as racial profiling, but it's a problem that's sprung up, and it's getting a lot of attention recently.
That connects in a very direct way, and here I'm not obfuscating. Boy, I got to use that word 2 or 3 more times. It's a lot of fun. We have a very active block club, and in our area, which is racially mixed, although predominantly African American, there are a number of very active block clubs. And almost all of them have a sign that says, and this is almost verbatim, if you're suspicious and I don't report you, my neighbor will. And we also have a website that's key to each neighborhood that our general part of town is very involved with. And I just noticed 2 days ago a post saying, talk about suspicious people. I see dozens of them every day. I kind of chuckled to myself, but didn't keep reading because you could only read so much of this. But if you have an attitude that people who are racially different from you are automatically suspicious, then practically nothing's going to work. This is a case of the law reflecting the government and the government reflecting the culture and the culture coming down to the people that constitute the culture. And it's so easy to reify the culture, to make it a whole separate thing, but the culture is made up of human beings like us, and in the end, that's where we have to bring ourselves.
What do you think, John?
Well, when you pose the question beforehand, putting us on the spot there, about calling the police, my mind automatically went back to the summer of 2009 in our neighborhood. And what happened was that my neighborhood was getting hit with burglaries, and there was a couple of cases of home invasions as well. And actually, it was during that time when we were on vacation that my house was broken into. So when we came back, it was the whole neighborhood was on high alert, and people, there was an instance where there were these 2 people who were African Americans who obviously didn't belong, in the sense that no one recognized them. They No one recognized them from anywhere in the neighborhood, and they're walking down and they're looking at houses. They were just walking down the street, but they're looking at houses, and we even saw a couple of them that were trying doors. But before we saw them doing that, we called the police. And as it turned out, before the police arrived, they tried getting into a house. The alarm went off and they ran before the police could get them. So when it comes to situations like that, when it comes to people of color, you need to be observant, but you don't necessarily have to be suspicious. But you follow your senses, but you don't let your imagination run away with you. So if you're in a situation where you feel unsafe, then by all means you contact law enforcement and you point out there's some suspicious characters. Now they can check it out, and they can rule, okay, these people are just hanging out, they're not doing anything. If anything further happens, call us. So just calling the police over a group of people in and of itself, it's not a wrong, but it's only when if you try to instigate a problem by either confronting them yourself or having the police do it for you, that's when it becomes wrong.
I would also argue that if the circumstances were identical and you wouldn't call the cops if it was a white person, you also need to check your heart there. There's also something morally wrong there. I come home and I catch a kid. I live on a dead-end street, so we all know each other. I come home, and every once in a while, I'll see a white, black, Hispanic kid. Different kids will try to use our alley to hide their cars while they smoke weed. I probably could call the cops on any of them. I choose not to. But, I think that I would see a real problem if every time it was the Hispanic or black kid, I called the cops, but every time it was the white kid, I just, shooed them off myself. And then that's why we end up with higher crime rates and higher conviction rates in minority communities, because we as a culture often will arbitrarily call in the police with racial animus, or at least that's something I believe I've observed. We're about halfway through the hour, and I just wanted to touch on something really quick. So no long dissertations here, Jim. But in fact, I'll start.
How about a short one? Could I have a short dissertation?
In fact, I'll start.
We can call it an abstract.
Are you for or against the idea of exile? Part of me in the pro-life movement would almost prefer offering up criminals to other countries in exile as opposed to a death penalty type situation. Do you have any thoughts on exile?
I'm adamantly opposed to the death penalty. And if it's a choice between the death penalty and exile, I would prefer exile. But I don't see that exile is, at least in the United States, something that we would have any need to have recourse to. Now, if this arbitrary before arrest extends to detention or exile, then of course I'm opposed to arbitrary exile. I can imagine countries say, and I've oftentimes thought that this would be a test case for a number of issues. Suppose you're in Somalia and it's just barely a country at all in any functional sense. It could well be in a case like that exile would be necessary, but I don't know that it would necessarily be arbitrary. I think it could be a well-founded exile. And we have to remember that the United Nations Declaration is supposed to hold across the board. We think here in the United States we're doing pretty well with 8, 9, and 10, and other countries might not be doing so well at all. But I do think that exile in principle could be legitimate.
Anything you want to contribute, John?
Not really. I mean, I always consider the current prison system that we have like it's a form of exile, because when a person commits a crime and they're convicted of it, then they're sent to prison, and that's a form of exile. But I don't necessarily consider that as banishment, which I think is what the article is referring to.
Yes,
when you're basically removed out of society into a different one, made up of fellow criminals and under a very strict regimen, that in a sense is exile. But I'm not sure. I wouldn't really vote for banishment either, because depending on what the charge is, I'd sooner keep the person within sight than have them abroad where we can't see them or possibly monitor them.
Well, now that we're into, we're leaving behind the arbitrary detentions and punishments. Let's get into the non-arbitrary ones. In Article 10, everyone is entitled to a full equality. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent, impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. And not to reopen the can of worms, but that's where a lot of our cases in Guantanamo are going to fall apart. They're not public and they're not impartial. But I'll let you gentlemen elaborate further on how you think both here in the U.S. and around the world we're doing these days in Article 10.
I think that in order to make Article 10 feasible, when it comes to the expression full equality, we have to understand it in terms of, I guess the technical term is threshold. It's just the case, and I wish Jack were here because we could argue about it more. It's just the case that some lawyers are better than other lawyers, and some lawyers are much better than other lawyers. And if someone says full equality requires that when you come to this fair and public hearing, your lawyer is just as good as any other lawyer, well, then the whole article collapses if we want strict equality. Full equality would have to be something like equality with regard to a lawyer who has met a basic threshold test of competence. And I think that's worth saying. I think sometimes people want to read this full equality in the sense of strict equality. And sometimes the strict equality that they're looking for is not readily measurable in the first place. You have to have a kind of a range equality rather than an exact equality.
Fair enough.
Now, if Jack were here, he'd say, as a radio pro, avoid dead space.
Yes, he would, although he might not say it on air.
That's because he's a radio pro.
I fully intend to make him listen to this afterwards as punishment for his absence without notice. But
do you know, once upon a time, and gentle listeners and worthy auditors, you can see the history of this show on the website. Once upon a time, we had frequent patches of silence. And I was very much a newbie at that point, and I asked the moderator, and the moderator, and get this, the moderator had done most of his radio work announcing hockey games. The moderator said to me, "Oh, I don't think that's so bad. It lets people know that we're being reflective."
I was about to say we should be open to moments of contemplation here on the Open Floor.
That's right.
I think that we, again, here in the United States, I think that we have, with the exception of our military courts, an excellent system of fair public hearings, at least for our civilian citizenry. I want to move on to Article 11, which comes in two parts, and so I'll address them one at a time. The first part is, everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty according to law in a public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary for his defense. And then the first thing I will half-jokingly, but somewhat seriously throw out here is, as we're moving through this, I understand that the masculine can be used to refer to the whole human race, but the document can come off as sexist occasionally, with all the hims and hises. As far as the presumption of innocence until proven guilty at a public trial. Again, I think for our citizenry, we do fairly well for that. But around the world, that is certainly not something that has taken root as strongly as we might like. Any thoughts from you, gentlemen, as far as how the world is doing with this first part of Article 11?
I'm probably way behind in terms of halfway decent understanding of other judicial systems, but I've always thought that under Napoleonic law, there was not a presumption of innocence. Perhaps there wasn't a presumption of guilt, but there certainly wasn't a presumption of innocence. And I wonder to what extent that's been changed in light of the UN declaration on this point. I suspect not very much, at least not very much in practice. And I think a kind of a reflection of this that does not put the United States in a very good light either, is that if somebody's presumed innocent, I presume you are innocent, and bail is set at $1 million. Or to somebody who has very, very little income, of course we presume you are innocent, and bail is set at $50,000. The practice of bail, I think, oftentimes works against the presumption of innocence.
Well, on that subject, though, a bail is pretty much set on depending on the person's danger to society. So, say, for example, if a person convicted for murder and there's already compelling evidence for it, then it could be understandable that the bail could be set at such a rate that the person can't afford in order to keep the person behind bars, or if the judge has reason to believe that that person won't show up for trial if he's freed, or in a sense jump bail, then I could see where setting the bail would be at an exorbitant rate would be beneficial, because, like I said, when you set the bail, you don't only presume the person's innocence, but you also have to think of the possibility that this person could be a clever delinquent if he has a history of this. So I wouldn't necessarily mark a high bail as in contradiction of presumption of innocence until proven guilty.
I just see what in polite debate is referred to as a tension here. I completely understand why some people are given bail that keeps them in jail. There's a free rhyme for the day. I can completely understand that, but I can't understand how we can say, using words as they're ordinarily understood, that we presume you are innocent. Nonetheless, you are a risk to society. Why is that? If you presume that the people are innocent, then why do you think they're a risk to society? And there, I think, is a credible movement to really restructure the whole bail system. Now, it could be what we want to say is we presume that you are legally innocent in a strict sense. However, there are other kinds of presumptions, and our legal system will now recognize other levels of presumption. You are presumed legally innocent, but you have shown by your behaviors that a reasonable person would take you to be a threat to others, and therefore we are. But I think the language that we have now, together with the bail system that we have now, suggests that we want to have our cake and eat it too.
Well, the bail system is, it's essentially just an assurance that the person's going to show up in the first place. And while each case is different, people are not necessarily different. They're not necessarily different in their actions. So if you have a person who has a history, then I could see where or the judge could assign their bail at a rate contingent on the individual person's record and the person's experience with the person being charged.
But I think what Jim's getting at isn't detaining a person at all prior to conviction a conflict with the first part of Article 11.
It depends on the nature of the case.
So,
well, there are cases now. Here we just poke and push a little bit, and my own view is that we should have this presumed innocent at level A, but not presumed innocent at level B, or presumed innocent at level A, but at level B, we're not dealing with strict innocence, and that's legal as well. I mean, I'd like to see some gradation there. And John is talking about what I think is so obvious a common sense. If somebody is a flight risk because they've done this sort of thing 10 times before, yes, but there are cases where there is a huge bail and the person has never been charged with this offense in the past. And sometimes you can understand why there is the huge bail. So-and-so has never been charged with treason before. So what? Charged with treason now, and we have a prima facie case that he's been involved with forces that are hostile to the government of the United States. So what if he's never done it before? We're going to have a really high bail. But I once upon a time on this very show said that the biggest books on campus in the past have been Norton's Anthology of the English Language and the Constitutional Law book. Because of these things, the Constitution is oftentimes in tension, not one word but in two words, in tension with itself. And this is what gives rise to cases. And I don't think there's any way you can write a legal document that's not going to give rise to cases because of internal tensions. If I could get through an hour without contradicting myself, I'd be pretty happy. And if you have a long legal document that has no internal contradictions, well, God bless you.
So I do want to get on to Section 2, but right before I do that, I was just trying to conceive of how we could have a bail system that didn't run afoul of the first section of Article 11. And the only thing I could think of, just like you to weigh on this real quick, John, is are you viewing confinement prior to trial as a civic duty as opposed to as a penal consequence?
I could say that in certain cases it could be a civic responsibility, yes. But while the person is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and that's a fundamental principle, the principle does not necessarily apply that everybody has a right to a bail.
Interesting. And to get there, you have to have the imprisonment. You have to get that captivity to be not a punishment. You have to couch that as a non-punishment in some way, because you're not punishing someone for a crime.
You're simply detaining that person under charge.
Interesting. Okay.
There'll be a kind of penal waiting in line. We're not saying when your turn comes that you won't be free, but in the meantime you must wait in line until the trial. I just think it's a very difficult thing, but I appreciate John's common sense approach to it, but how to capture that common sense approach in the law is not so easy. Do you know, do you want to go ahead to 2? Because we're getting to the point where we want to talk solidarity talk.
So no one shall be, this is Article 11, Section 2, no one shall be held guilty of any penal offense on account of any act or commission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at the time when it was committed, nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time the penal offense was committed. I think this is absolutely critical. I can joke with Jim now about which one of us is more long-winded, but should that become illegal in the future, I would hate to be arrested for my comments on this show in the past.
Yeah, something like this, it can't be applied retroactively, definitely.
Now, I would argue that the reverse should totally be applied retroactively. For example, when places in municipalities and states where recreational marijuana is now legal, I think it serves no societal purpose to keep people convicted of marijuana possession in prison at this point. So while I strongly affirm this portion, I think the inverse does not need to be held. What would you say to that, Jim?
Well, I think that's an important point. I think that I agree with you. I don't think that apart from new legislation that our position is going to be honored. And I think there's a concept here that comes from classical jurisprudence and classical ethical reasoning that I could have cited earlier that's worth knowing. It's worth knowing that this concept is out there historically. Epikeia, and it's a Greek term, and it's one that connects with this idea that there's slippage when you apply a law, a general law, and you have to have general laws. There's slippage when you apply it to case after case after case. And so there has to be an intervention on the part of the prudent person, and we hope that the judge is a prudent person, of epikeia, case-focused justice. Now, here's another, pardon the long-windedness, and I'll pass by this with a shorter wind. In Aquinas' definition of a law, Aquinas being the common doctor, as I said, one of the first things he says about law is that it's a dictate of reason for the common good that is promulgated. So there are plenty of dictates of reason for the common good, but unless the political authority makes them known, sorry, they don't count as a law. So once the law is promulgated, part of the law characteristically is the punishment that goes with the law. And if it's promulgated with such and such a punishment, but then enforced with a greater punishment, then the law itself becomes vitiated. Well, maybe that's enough. I'd like to with Matthew's consent, ask him to tell us a little bit, not right now about local solidarity politics, but about this whole business that's going on in the Solidarity Party, our upcoming convention, and its focus on membership in the National Committee. Matthew, I'm proud to say of him, has been a member of the National Committee. We're having a national convention. It's going to be online, which doesn't mean that it won't be fine, but it is online. And the real centerpiece of this, as I understand it, is electing members of our national committee. What's involved in that, Matthew?
Well, in order to become a full voting member of the American Solidarity Party, you have to do a couple things. Everyone must affirm the sanctity of human life, the necessity of social justice, our responsibility for the environment, and the possibility of a more peaceful world. And I believe of our good listeners that every one of them should be able to wholeheartedly make that affirmation statement with absolutely no problem.
I agree.
And then we ask for those that are going to avail themselves of the privilege of voting in this fledgling party. We ask for a minimum donation of $10. That's annually to vote in anything that comes up that year. And please don't let that that minimum amount, hold you back. If you have more to give, we're doing important work. The last note that I'll put on as far as eligibility to vote is that if $10 is truly a hardship for you, or if you have extenuating circumstances, for example, you're a government contractor and you can't make political donations, we do have a system by which you can email the party and request a waiver with an explanation of the hardship or the extenuating circumstances. We certainly aren't out to punish the poor or exclude people. We're just looking for people to have a little skin in the game if they're going to have voting privileges. Now, I think this is an incredibly important season for our party. The people who are being elected to the National Committee have 2-year terms, which means the people elected in this coming June, the convention will be the end of June. This coming June, the people who are elected will be on the National Committee as we prep for the 2020 campaign season. And I think that the 2020 campaign season is going to be absolutely gigantic for our party. So I'm asking all people of sincere faiths, even people who don't have faith, all people who are convicted that the common good is more important than greedy self-interest, all people who want to find common ground based on common sense solutions for our common good. Please consider joining the American Solidarity Party. Please consider running for our national committee. We could use talented people, experienced in politics, experienced in nonprofit work. That could even just be your church. We are looking to have a bounty of good candidates to run, and it is my understanding that there are no candidates as of this morning who have filled out all the paperwork. And again, that election is just at the end of June, so it's not too late to get involved. It's not too late to become a voting member. It's not too late to run. If you think you'd like to help out this values-based political party, really have a voice in American politics. Thank you all, and I will be happy to respond to any questions in the comments on our page. And also feel free to just search solidarity-party.org to learn more. Thanks for that opportunity, Jim.
Matthew, would you say that people that join this party are joining a choir group? Or would you say that people that join this party and run for office in the party, would you say that they'll find normal human beings with their everyday pull and tug and an occasional nasty swipe?
It is definitely the latter. There are plenty of saints, but I mean that in the Protestant sense.
And they're going to march in, is that it?
Oh, let's hope. And and also we are all deeply aware of our humanity and our need to come together and help one another in order to change the world. I mean that's the goal. We want to change the nature of American politics. We want to change this country for the better. And none of us are Napoleon. None of us are even Jack Kennedy. None of us are going to pull this together or pull this out of a hat on our own. And so we need to band together. We need community. We need the grassroots. You know, if you want to be part of making that happen, you can have a voice here.
And just to show you that even between Matthew and myself, there are differences. I personally wouldn't want another Napoleon or even a Jack Kennedy. I'd be looking more for people like, well, John Breen and Jack Quirk and Ed Rushman. I'd be looking for people like them.
We could get us a couple more Ed Rushmans. We'd be really well off.
Yes.
Definitely.
Well, John?
I was agreeing with Matthew there.
All right. We're at the end. We have just a very short time for a very short prayer. Lord, as we approach Pentecost, 50 days after Easter, as we approach the feast of the Spirit's coming upon the apostles and his coming upon Mother Mary, we ask that we be open to the Spirit, and that we love one another, and that we come together in solidarity. Amen, Lord Jesus. Maranatha, come again. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.